That's what I'm talking about. Welcome, everybody. That, of course, is the great No More Kings with Critical Hit. And welcome, everyone, the Welcome Arvanauts, to a Friday night stream. It is 8:45 p.m. Eastern, and it is episode 28 of Masters of the Dungeon. And I have, of course, a guest star with me today. Normally, Little Red Dot is with us, but she is on vacation, a well-deserved vacation. And so I have a guest star here today, and it's very appropriate that I have this guest star because of something coming up this weekend, because as Garlic Tofu mentioned in chat, it is a very exciting weekend. So before we go any further, just a couple of reminders about ways to support us here on the channel. If you haven't done so already, please follow us on the channel. Please make sure to check out our YouTube channel, !ArvTube there. We really want to get more people over there and subscribed if we can. We have 753 subscribers, which is great, and we have more people that are gathering there, but as we continue to push upward, that helps in terms of exposure and more people seeing it. And there are people who check out the YouTube channel and are like, wait, you do this live? And then they come back to us live. I'm like, yes, I do this live, and here's when and why. So you can check out all of our past broadcasts over there. Exclamation point Arv Tweets is my Twitter, where you can see my tweets on various things specifically relating to writing and gaming and streaming and teaching and family and music, and yes, some occasional politics things come in there as well because 2020. So you can follow me over there, and of course the Discord, exclamation point Arvcord, where you can always hang out with the Arvanauts in between streams, and that is growing as well. So that's really great, and we love that. You can find all of this on my website, arvaneleron.com. You can also find the schedule there too. And on the financial side, you can support us with the Patreon, exclamation point Arvtreon, which is where you can get inspirations for the players in our various campaigns. You can get a copy of one of my band's albums. You can get a professional writing critique. You can get an epic character background written for you, an epic poem written for you, etc., etc. So you can do all that kind of good stuff. And you can also support the channel, which builds us up towards various channel milestones. And it really does make a difference in terms of what we're able to put back into the channel. So please consider jumping on board with that. Also, please consider supporting us by checking out the shop, exclamation point Arv Shop, which is the merchandise area where you can get Curse of Strahd, specifically Infinity and Beyond stuff and Adventures of Middle-earth stuff right now, soon to be Esper Genesis stuff over there as well. Exclamation point Arv Shop for that. And last, of course, that sub button right under your video window. We are sitting at 85 subs right now. Again, you can inspire the players, get custom sub badges and emotes and all that kind of good stuff, so that really helps as well. On the publishing side, exclamation point Icarus. I see that Athos Arts is in chat, and that is good because they are amazing people. My publisher for Icarus and Jelinek, my graphic novels with art by Acela Fabio, script by Keith DeCandido, and lettering by Chris Suda. Really amazing book. I'm so happy with it. It is now literally winging its way to various peoples. It is winging its way to the Kickstarter folks, and of course all the review folks as well. And also the original page art, I am happy to announce, has gone out to those who supported the Kickstarter at a high enough level. So the original art with Acela first made the amazing pictures, some of which I've shown you on stream, that has now gone out to Kickstarter folks as well, which is super exciting. So we're making great, progress on that as far as the print editions of those books. Retail editions of those will be coming up on November 10th. And so in the meantime, we're getting blurbs and review copies and all that. And we do have a few extra copies left over that are the pre-retail editions that are available on Athos Arts spot, and you can do that by checking out this with Icarus and Jelinek. The library is Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, my 5e adventure and source book from Alligator Art. Alligator, I'm thinking Athos Arts, and all of a sudden I decided to combine all the companies. Too many A's. Alligator Alley Entertainment, again, an amazing company, and that has been doing real well over at Drive-Thru RPG. Print edition of that is coming out very, very soon. And last but certainly not least on that front is exclamation point Greyshade KS, which is my Greyshade Kickstarter announcement coming any day now about whether that's going to be in October or February for that Kickstarter, but I'm very excited about that as well. And last but certainly not least, extremely important, exclamation point BLM, Black Lives Matter. This again is that link to that resource that I've been talking about quite a bit, which is continually updated, which has resources for educating yourself, educating your allies, educating the people around you, learning more about effective protest tactics, about aspects of policing and so forth, and also, of course, the ability to donate to many of those places as well. So please consider jumping on board for that also, and very appropriate, I think, based on the guest and the game that we've got coming up for you, that we are talking about that subject also. Schedule-wise, we have Masters of the Dungeon tonight. When I'm done with that, we're going to have some Kingdoms of Amalur for you. I'm going to be continuing my main and faction quest play on that score, and then for tomorrow, we will have D&D Curse of Strahd with Infinity and Beyond. And then on Sunday, and this is the part where I will bring my guest star in. On Sunday, we will have something very exciting, and I'm going to bring you over to see that the person that you see below you will be intimately and directly involved with this on multiple levels. And that is, of course, I am super happy to introduce my guest star, also known as the Rising Tides in chat, and this is, of course, Brandon O'Brien. Brandon, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you on this month on Masters of the Dungeon. I'm super excited to have you. How are you? For those people who may still not know you, I don't know how that's possible, but for those who may not know you completely, can you let people know who you are? And then we're going to talk about this game that you're running on the channel on Sunday, which is super exciting. But tell me about you first.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon O'Brien. I am a dork. I am a writer, poet, very recently a game designer. I'm the poetry editor of Fire, a magazine of Black speculative fiction, which has been nominated twice for the Hugo Award. Um, and I'm glad to be here.
It is very exciting, and also the first annual Ignite Awards are now out and available, which is from Fire. Do you want to
Mhm.
tell folks quickly just about Ignite while I get your Twitter up for them?
Oh yeah, definitely. Fire decided in the aftermath of Con Zealand, uh,
Yes.
the short version being a lot of terrible things happened that shouldn't happen at a con as big as Worldcon. And Fire decided that later this year in October, they're going to have the first ever FireCon, which is going to be dope. It's also going to be digital, but registration is available now. And as as one of the events in FireCon, they decided that they were also going to have their own award ceremony called the Ignite Awards. The ballot of which is available for anyone to vote in right now. And among other very astounding names on the entire ballot, a poem of mine is actually nominated in the Best Speculative Poetry category,
A
which
good poem
is
of
really dope.
yours. A good poem of yours, by the way. I read it. It's excellent. Yeah. Not that you need
Thank
me
you
to tell
very
you that, but
much.
I'm just saying from my point of view, it's awesome. So but yeah, so that's it, and it's so that is super exciting, and yeah, there's been a ton of buzz when this came out. By the way, everything that Faya has been doing is just super clutch, like right down to the level of if you go over and look at this. I was just thinking about this now because you get to see a nice, huge version of the Ignite Awards logo. That logo is badass. I mean, that is a that is really a good logo, and it's just an
Yeah,
example of it's a small thing, but it's just an example of an incredibly professional, forward-thinking, just polished something of a group of people who are doing a con like this for the first time, and it's just fascinating to me that somehow able to create an award setup like that and like a con like that and somehow not have everything collapse on top of you in the same way. I mean, I'm not going to get into big back and forth on
right.
that, except
We're not gonna rehash that, but
no, but geez,
I
yeah.
do want to definitely I want to definitely shout out LD Lewis and Brent Lambert, who have been really like 100% forward thinking in terms of FireCon. They do a lot of work in general to make sure that Fire as a magazine and all of our other projects keep running. I think that the two of them need to sleep more often, but
Sleep is
they
good.
do so much like astounding work. And if it weren't for them, I strongly believe FireCon wouldn't exist. And I'm really glad that they're always on the ball when it comes to these things.
Yeah, it's really cool, and yeah, just again, like I just put the thing in the center, and it's really good stuff. Anyway, congratulations to
Yeah.
Faya and to all of the nominees. Good luck to all the nominees. Congratulations on the nominations and all that kind of good stuff. So now that we've talked about all that and know a little bit about Brandon, normally the way that we run this is folks will know who have watched the show a lot is we will run through a couple of like exciting things that have happened in a campaign and stuff like that. I want to remove that a little bit just for tonight because I want to focus a little bit on some specific topics that Brandon and I spoke about before. And it begins with something that I am just unreasonably excited about. So it's my show, so I get to talk about it because I'm just excited about it. So and that is I want you to talk to people a little bit. First of all, if you could about the game that you're running on Sunday, which is, I've been announcing this a bunch. This is Sound Clash, the campaign for which is called the Clampdown. You can see the logo right above you on the screen, which is done by the amazing Shadowed Mage, who I'd like to give a shout out to Shadowed, who's done a great job on not only the logo, but also the overlay, which you folks will see on Sunday for this. Shadowed has done a really good job on this, so thanks, Shadowed. No, I'm not. Yes, I'm excited about Dune 2020, but that's not all, Dragon, okay? Yes, and also that. But no, so Sound Clash, the Clampdown. So since Brandon is the designer of this thing, Brandon, I'd like you to talk a little bit, if you would, about, first of all, what is the game about? Like, sort of explain a little bit about the premise behind the game and what people can expect to see when they tune in this Sunday at 8 o'clock, I believe it is. I think we said 8 p.m. Eastern with the new crew. So before we talk about all that, please tell me a little bit about the game and what people can expect to see from Sound Clash.
We're going to talk about time, obviously, as well, because a lot of things. But yes. Sound Clash is a game about attempting to start a rock band. Well, to start a band in a universe where very recently in history, for reasons that players get to determine on their own, magic has now entered the universe and has imbued itself deep within all music in the world. And now that that's happened, magic obviously plays a part in your own musical performance, but it also plays a part in the industry as well. And that means that you're navigating not only how magic interferes with the world at large and how you're asked to actually interact with that magical world as one of the few people who can actually engage with it, but you're asked to interact with the industry that has become more brutal and more peculiar as a result of magic now being an element of their industry. So it's not just performing, but it's performing with the acknowledgement that if something goes really right or really wrong, you're now having a magical effect on the universe that you probably cannot control. It's being aware of the fact that there are now magical events and magical creatures in your world that only you can interact with, and you can only interact with it by doing the thing that you love and can do best, which is sing and perform. And it's being aware of the fact that the industry, which is already terrible because you can't trust the entertainment industry.
Totally alternative history. I mean, the music industry is completely trustworthy now, as we know. I mean, like, completely believable.
Oh yeah, definitely. Right wing.
Never screws artists. I mean,
yeah, everybody gets paid. Sure, nobody ever gets screwed in their contracts. But imagine what that would look like.
Yeah, I know. What if?
Yeah. So like, all of the ways in which those things interact really intrigue me in terms of, like, now that you've been given this opportunity primarily to do the thing that you love, how do you feel about the fact that the thing that you love is both supremely powerful and, as a result, supremely tainted in the way that the world views it? So yeah, that's Sound Clash.
The pitch was so great. I just keep raving about how good the pitch was. So before we talk a little bit about the players, tell me a little bit about what inspired you for this, because I know you said you've been working on this for a couple of years and you've been excited about it for, various reasons. But what, I guess I'm curious first about what inspired you, and then sort of on two levels. One, content, what inspired you to talk about this particular world and set it up this way, although I know the world is somewhat shaped by the players, but you know what I mean. What inspired the kind of root of the game? And then secondly, maybe mechanically too, like what were your design inspirations on a mechanical level?
Well, in terms of the world, what I can say, and in fact, before I even get to that point, I should actually talk about like what was the impetus for the game existing in the first place.
Okay.
Which was the remarkable game designer Avery Alder in 2017 or 2018, if I recall correctly, put out a call for fledgling game designers who wanted to be mentored in their process. And at that point in time, I had no idea that I actually wanted to make a thing. I had like scraps of things that would be cool, but I never actually thought that that was a thing that I wanted to do.
Okay.
And your friend and mine, Mike Underwood, mentioned it in a group chat that I was in. And I was like, hey, that sounds cool. What's the worst that can happen? And the idea that I eventually like took out and decided to like dust off and see if it would be useful was the idea primarily for a game where all of the action is primarily non-combat. So that was the first thing that came to mind.
Okay.
What are the ways in which you can make action that, while it is still possible to get in like a 100% fist fight, there are like knives and stuff in this game. But what
Okay.
if the majority of the action is some other thing that you still have to be proficient at, but is not the act of fighting? And I was just like, what if people sang? And then everything else just kind of took shape around that idea, which was how do you make music complex in a way that is interesting and fascinating? And how do you make a world that operates around the assumption that that is interesting and fascinating? And that's where the world understanding that I had around Soundclash came about. That based on things that are outside of everyone's control, there is this thing that already exists in the universe and has now been changed by magic. And everybody just has to deal with the fact that there was a point in time when that was not the case, and now it's the case. And what does the world look like now that that's the case? I was really like intrigued by what that says about the entertainment industry, what that says about the ways in which we have conversations about individual artists in like public space, what it says about the ways that we engage with politics through the lens of art,
Right.
because the powers that be are also a potential antagonist in this universe because they also see the value of engaging with art in a certain way.
Right.
So like those elements of the world just kind of came together. And as I previously mentioned to you when I pitched the individual campaign, the game itself doesn't have a world. The rules text is based on Blades in the Dark with like very wild abstractions, like
Right.
the dice are not the same, for instance. Um, but when you pick up a copy of Blades in the Dark, you know what happens in Duskwall. You know the names of districts. You know the people who live there.
Right.
Um, but what I very strongly had in mind when I started working on Soundclash is that instead there are guidelines on how players get to have discussions about the world that they live in. The GM still has to do like stuff like what is the name of this city and stuff like that. But the larger kind of open-ended questions about what happened in this universe and what does it look like are very strongly in the hands of the entire table. And that includes the GM, obviously, but players are actively engaged with the question of how do they feel about these things? Are these the kinds of things that they want to engage with in their play? Um, so yeah,
Let me
that's
can I
where
let me jump in for
the
just a sec.
world thing comes out.
Let me just jump in for just a second, actually, Brandon, because that's I'm curious about that. Because you're right that Blades in the Dark, one of the things that is, I think, one of the strongest aspects for me of Blades in the Dark is how beautifully Duskwall and everything around it is constructed. It's extraordinarily atmospheric. It kind of, I can liken it really only to I've played a couple of games that are similar to that. In video game form, the example that always comes to mind for me is Dishonored, which I think
Dishonored.
has some of the best world building of any video game. Extraordinarily well done. But so anyway, that's very of a place, right? Very location specific. So what I'm wondering about is, was this a matter of agency for you, that you wanted to decenter the agency off of that and more into the players as a whole? What made you want to go from something that wasn't location specific for the design of something like this?
Well, it's a lot of seemingly contradictory things.
Okay.
First, as a writer from the Caribbean, I live in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm in Trinidad and Tobago right now. where it just recently, as of a few hours ago, stopped raining terribly.
Yeah, I saw that. I was hoping for the best.
So was I.
Yeah.
Um, so like my experience with a lot of media in general doesn't include me. So I'm always very thoughtful as a result. Whenever I have the capacity to create a thing, I'm always asking questions about what that setting does.
Okay.
There are a lot of games, for instance, that we've spoken about that I thought would make very interesting content for your channel. That if I got the opportunity to play it or GM it, my obvious first question would be, how about instead of always setting these things in vague medieval European location,
Right.
or what if the United States, but 50 years in the future? What if we did that in the Caribbean? What if you all got to see what it was like to experience these things from my perspective?
Right.
And part of like how I viewed Sound Clash as an object as a result was, what if giving players agency meant that they also got the opportunity to decide what elements of this universe or even the entire universe was reflective of themselves rather than reflective of the assumptions of people who probably never experienced their part of the world before. Um, so that's one thing. The second thing is, from a production perspective, it actually means that I get to write a lot of things because not only does the game have, as it exists right now, a lot of prompts as to like what are the initial catalysts that lead to magic existing in this world and how do people initially respond to it, but it means that at some point in the future I could decide, what if I did give you a setting, but it's not going to be the setting they are accustomed to and it's going to be another book, just
Setting
because
books.
I wanted to be just a little. That's just the little selfish thought that I had, very honestly. But also um, the agency element of giving players that opportunity to engage with that is also, the world itself gets to be determined by not only the things that players actually want to engage with, but it means that those catalysts are not triggered by things that they definitely don't want to do.
Okay.
It's theoretically possible that the triggering event that leads to magic existing in this universe could be an invasion by aliens. But if you don't want to do alien invasion stories, then it gets to be any other thing that you want. And I just give you prompts in order to consider what those things might be. And in terms of thinking more deeply about what you'd want to do in that game and what you'd want that setting to reply to as a result. But my job is not to give you answers to questions, is to give you questions that you can answer yourself. Like, it's a very, from a writer's perspective, and this was a conversation that I was literally having in another event earlier this evening, which was, from a writer's perspective, it is actually very difficult to engage with RPGs because as a medium, it expects that players are engaging with it with full agency. But as a storytelling device, there are obviously moments where, in order for someone to move forward, they have to get a piece of story.
Right.
And the balance obviously is, if I'm going to give you this entire world that I made up because I thought that this world was cool, then I could have just written you a novel. But if I'm going to give you the opportunity to engage with these things, it means that I also need to trust you to know what you want and how you want to engage with those things.
So I find this fascinating, and I just want to say quickly, let me just reset. This is episode 28 of Masters of the Dungeon. You are listening to, I am your host, Arvin Eleron, and this is the amazing and multi-talented speculative fiction poet and author and editor and game designer and many other things, and that is Brandon O'Brien, who is also the current GM of the Twitch Speculate Blades in the Dark campaign. And just, I love that question, Incredible and Edible, and I'm actually going to ask, if you don't mind, because we are going to have a section at the end where we're going to literally run through questions. So please hold on to that, because that's a great question, and I'm curious about that stuff too. So we will come back to it, and I haven't forgotten about it. Brandon, before we get to the player names and then start talking a little bit about more general concepts about what this brings me to, I want to throw something at you. It's not a curveball. I want to throw something at you because this really is fascinating to me, and I want to explain it, if I may, as just a sort of quick little anecdote. So I wrote an academic essay which was published in a collection on V.S. Naipaul some years ago, and specifically A House for Mr. Biswas. And so I was in.
How am I now hearing this about you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I actually argue that there's more agency than people think in Mr. Biswas. Anyway, so I was at this conference in Norway, of all places, that was on various subjects, and that was the paper that I was presenting. And at the end, there was a British academic who was well known, I guess, to a lot of people, was close to retirement. She was a white British academic. And she said, some other people had asked various questions about aspects of the paper, and she said, one of the things that strikes me about the way that you describe the world that V.S. Naipaul creates is that he's able to write about this from the position of being an expat, and that Naipaul himself wrote about the difficulty of being within the culture about which he was going to write. And you can take different opinions about whether that's true or not. Obviously, Edward Brathwaite had different beliefs than Derek Walcott, than did many other people. But the point is, this is what Naipaul believed. And she said, but the truth is, Naipaul is trying to do this from a distance, right? Like, Naipaul is trying to do this as if he has something to say about the Caribbean and about Trinidad. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't follow. What do you mean, as if? And she was like, well, I mean, Naipaul talks as if there is some, knowledge that he would have of this world. And I'm like, sorry? And she said, do you think, and she just blurts out, do you really think Naipaul is English enough to be an expat? And I was like, so I took a moment because, I'm in this room of like 100 academics, right? And my wife is filming this, and I look over for a moment and I'm like, I believe that V.S. Naipaul would be perfectly capable of being not only Trinidadian enough, but also British enough to speak about something which was initially colonized, and from which he could speak as both the position of having been colonized and now from the position of the people who were the colonizers. I think Naipaul had no problem with this issue at all. And she's like, rah, 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 afterwards. But I was like, did you literally just say that he's not British enough, and presumably therefore not Trinidadian enough either, right? Like, not anything enough, I guess. He was just in the world somehow. And the reason I bring up this anecdote is I want to ask you about oh God, I can still see your face too. But I want to ask you about what that said, if we can sort of apply a little bit of that to the world of Soundclash itself in the following way. Because you said, well, I talked, maybe I can write more stuff and I can write a setting book. And your quote was, that's the sort of little selfish part of me that says that. And I understand completely your argument about creating agency for the players. I'm wondering, though, how you would respond to those who might say, but we want something specific, because then it just means that, for example, the Caribbean and Trinidad in particular here is constantly screwed. Like, they don't get anyone outside speaking about them or inside speaking about them. And I don't necessarily agree with this position, incidentally, but I just immediately thought of that academic, and I wanted you to expound, I guess, about your take on this as a game designer.
Right. So this is not just my thought as a game designer. This is my thought
as many things, probably. Yeah, I figured.
This is my thought as a reader. This is my thought as someone who watches television. This is my thought as someone who has a body. I spent a lot of time in the world being a tourist of things that are popular. What I mean by that is, there is, like, that that old yarn by Juno Diaz. Everybody can translate a line from Elvish, but speak as just give them a little line from Spanish, and suddenly they get baffled.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I, as someone who speaks English, but also speaks a dialect of English called Trinidad Creole English, I'm constantly overwhelmed by the fact that there are people all along various diasporas that constantly find themselves in genre spaces where there is this long line of very revered and esteemed things that are expected to be the trustworthy beacons of the genre. And if you ever attempted to do any of those things sounding like me, or um, sounding like a Latinx person, or sounding like someone who lives in the African continent, suddenly it's either very exotic in a way that has to be very niche or can't be done at all. We have done, like, pick your take your pick of RPG rule sets, and there have been 5 and 6 and 7 very unique medieval European settings for those games. But if you're lucky, you might get that one exotic African place
Yep.
where suddenly all the animals talk or something, or there is some natural element of nature that is trying to kill people on a regular basis.
Yep.
One of the things that obviously stands out to me, not from an RPG perspective, was when Magic the Gathering came out with the Kaladesh setting.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and one of the very first things that happened is a gentleman who is now revered in the community specifically for having this conversation got up in the PAX presentation where they announced this setting and asked a series of questions about why Kaladesh was Kaladesh, and immediately was judged harshly by the MTG community for having asked the question. That person was of Indian descent. He can't ask questions about the way that you portray his own culture in your universe, the same universe that has been doing various
Yep.
versions of tried and true
Yep.
medieval European RPG settings for years.
Yep. This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's exactly how I felt. And I didn't even ascertain that that was what was going on at first. I was so floored. I'm like, what did you just ask me? Yes, yes. And I guess,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
That question, by the way, just utterly baffles me. Like, first, V.S. Naipaul is perfectly capable of determining for his own
Of
self where he
course.
wants,
Of
what
course.
his
Yeah.
identity is. But
Yeah.
secondly, um, Trinidad claimed him. You don't get to tell us how to feel
I
about him.
know. I know. I was like, what the it's just like, how dare you? And also
So weird.
it's so weird. And what it does too, and this is the thing that really pisses me off as an academic in particular, what that does is it further delimits, right, and restricts, so that now it's bad enough that you want to argue that people can't somehow be part of what is alleged to be Commonwealth literature if they wish to be, right? They're not allowed to do that because they're from that, in quotes, exotic place. Now the claim is they're also apparently not able to speak. They can join, in quotes, the Commonwealth. They can move to move to Great Britain. They can move to London. They can, right? But it's still not good enough for them to be able to then write back about the culture that they came from either. So I guess that just means you just can't speak. Right? Like ultimately that apparently is that's the end goal of that logic. Instead, you just, and I mean, I'm not the person as a white, middle class American to make these comments. It's just that it felt to me like such a staggering indictment of the bullshit that academics would actually present when that's exactly the opposite of what academia should be doing. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't mean to go off on a rant, but oh my God, Like,
I have a lot of thoughts.
oh my God. Anyway, I don't want to get us too trapped, but I just, yeah.
As a Trini, who not only already has all kinds of complicated feelings about Naipaul, but like,
Yeah.
I come from the part of the region where several writers in the 70s and 80s traveled to the UK only for their immediate descendants in the present day to be considered not citizens.
Yeah.
That conversation just strikes me as really, really weird. It's just
Yeah.
so yes.
So
What it
strange.
is
Anyway.
is we need to have just a literature
I
conversation.
know,
We
we
just
do.
need
I
to
don't
have
want
to
to
sit
get off
down
track,
to
but
just
but it amazes me. But what you just said though about the even the RPG element though is tied into what we're talking about here about what was necessary. Is it fair to say then that part of what's being done in Sound Clash in the sort of setting agnostic aspect of it, which is not the same thing incidentally as setting resistant. Like it sounds to me like you very much want, correct me if I'm wrong, players to be making very powerfully relevant settings to them, right? It's not just like, oh yeah, well then just throw things in and then see what happens. Like the world building for the players is a big deal, right? Is that fair to say? Like you want much out of them in the world building aspect. It's just you don't want to build the world here. You want them to be the ones that are asking the questions that matter. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. Not only because like from the very lazy GM perspective, there is also the benefit of I don't need to do all of this prep. They just ask these
Okay.
people, just ask the players what it is they want. But also because it means that um like for instance, I already know for a fact that um because Sound Clash is the game that it is, a lot of people will rely very obviously on certain kinds of setting signifiers that are very obvious to them. If if a table playing in the UK wanted to play a punk game like we're going to play for the Clampdown, they're going to play in 80s like Brighton because if those are
Right.
touchstones that they know, I want them to play there. But part of the way that I want that to be engaged is very obviously, well, if it's not literally 80s Brighton, then what else exists in this place that you can find value in? And I want to give players the opportunity to do that, not only because it means that this world is literally not the real world, um, but because the things that matter as a result, because the things that you place value on as an individual, as a player, as somebody who cares about the genre, for any of those reasons, now has an opportunity to physically exist. Um,
Right. Right.
and you get to say that this is a place that has value. You get to say that this city or this block or this like just like a random shop somewhere has value because it has value to you, not only because you put it there,
Right.
but because you put it there because you wanted people to engage with something that is relevant about that space. And because I asked you, it means that we're going to engage with that place.
Yeah, which is really neat and is honoring the sort of the desire for people to feel the world that they to connect with a world that they engage with because they've always wished they could play within it, and to make it specific in terms of locale where they are the ones giving you the things they specifically care about. So let's talk a little bit then. I want to talk about the players here, and then we'll talk about maybe some more general conclusions we can have. So can you tell us some? And I'm going to go hurriedly find a bunch of Twitter. Can you tell us about this? And let me tell you, folks, like I found out tonight. I was today years old when I discovered how many applications we had. We had tons of applications that Brandon had to sort through. And Brandon, all the people that did not get in, Brandon was like, "You are rejected utterly." No, I'm just kidding. Brandon did not.
Oh God, no, no, that's not what happened.
I'm joking. No, but we had a lot of people who were really good, and I think one of your quote was, "You wished you were sort of mad that there were people you couldn't get in for this because they would have been awesome for this too." And
Yeah.
so we had an embarrassment of riches. So tell me a little bit. Tell us about the players, and I'm going to go find them on Twitter right now.
Okay. Because one of the players is literally in chat.
Ooh.
The Neon Caster is
Ah.
actually one of our players.
Okay.
Their name is Nathan Blades. They're coming to us from the UK. They've been on streams before. They're also a designer in their own right. who I'm very eager to see some of their work as well. But I'm really pleased to have Nathan on board. I think that Nathan is definitely going to help develop some of the like from my own perspective as someone playtesting the game. I'm particularly glad to get somebody who's designing from another
Yep.
non-American context to help me learn more about how this game is going to work.
Super awesome.
Um,
Welcome, Nathan. Thank you for being here. And thank you for being part of the show, for the part of Sound Clash too. That's going to be awesome. Of the Clampdown. Cool.
Thank
All
you
right.
so
So
very
we
much.
have Nathan Blades. Good stuff. Okay.
Also, we have Katie Chin, who I was lucky enough to meet at Big Bad Con last year, but I totally wasn't aware that she even applied until I got inside and went, okay, this is really cool. Because um, among other like streaming stuff that Katie has done, Katie is also on a narrative podcast called Valence. She plays Grace Chen. Her voice work is astounding. I'm really excited to see what theater shenanigans we get up to as a result, because I want obviously to give people opportunities to be as dramatic as possible, because this is the kind of game where you get dramatic as possible.
I dig it.
Um,
And
so yeah,
Canadian. So we will definitely get the large Canadian contingent, and I'm not joking. Of people will be like, yes, Canada represent. So Canadians shadowed will be very happy to hear that, as will many others. So yes, so Canada is represented here too. Awesome. That's pretty sweet. Yeah. So we have got awesome. So we have got Nathan and we've got Katie. All right.
next is Valeria Villavicencio, um, who is an aspiring streamer and has done podcast work as well. Who I mostly accepted because she is just very eager to play, and I wanted people who were eager to be able to tell me, "Hey, this is continual. This is my eagerness is being sustained by this game," and that I wanted to obviously get feedback from folks who have played things like Blades but not Blades. Um, so I'm very eager to see how Val feels about the game as we actually start digging in.
And this is can you do the last name for me again, because I'm trying to find on Twitter. Valeria. That's
You will find her on Twitter at Villain Vicencio. I will put that for you now, because I have all of these things open, but you didn't just ask me to do the thing for you, and it makes me feel like I haven't actually been helpful.
No. It makes me. I wasn't trying to undercut either. I just was running to do that. There we go. Villain was man. See, I put it with a Z. This is what happens. These are the wages. Okay. Outstanding. So Villain Vicencio. Very cool.
Yes, and our very last space, which I'm going to put in the chat as well, is Amuraz, who did not apply because I had asked them ages ago, before this stream was even a dream in your brain. Would you like to help me play? Would you like to help me play test Sound Clash, because I'm not sure if Sound Clash is a thing yet. And they obviously were very, very excited. They're also a designer, have been doing lots of work in the design space for some time now. Also a mathematician who I desperately need, because I need to make sure that the dice in my game make sense. So I'm very excited to get not only their design perspective, but to make sure that that process definitely leads towards decisions and roles that are as streamlined as and engaging as possible, without either being too hard or too easy, and obviously just making sure that the flow of the game from a narrative perspective is really engaging. So yeah.
Wow, this is great. What a great cast of people. And
so those are my 4 people. In an ideal world, if I had like if days had more than 24 hours in them, I would just make several bands and just put them in a gauntlet amongst each other, but I don't have that energy.
The big epic.
So
Wow. Yeah.
one of these days
Yeah.
we'll do
Yeah.
like a tournament thing.
Yeah.
It'll be weird and silly, but as for now, this is the cast of the Clampdown.
Oh, very exciting. That is a super, super great cast. So we are going to make sure that as soon as we can, we will get those, all of those folks put together in a overall command, which we will add to the chat, which will be something like, exclamation point, Clash Crew or something like that. We'll figure out something cool. Clampdown Crew. And then people will be able to see all of the links to Twitter and the like. So that's great. So for those of you who are in chat, welcome. For those of you watching the VOD later who I couldn't say this to directly, welcome. I am honored to be able to stream this game and to be able to have you folks on. It's going to be great. Yeah, what a great cast. That's awesome. So Brandon has done a great job, as I would have expected, in putting this together. So it's going to be really cool. And I do like the fact too that you were looking for a combination of not just people who, in fact, not only, they have experience in doing this, that, and the other, but you were also looking for people with enthusiasm. And in a couple of cases, it was the enthusiasm that almost won you over, right? As much as anything else. It was, I'm really pumped to play this game, please. Because that is important. Not just, this person is great because everyone knows them or something, but also because they're excited to play, which is great.
Here is the difficulty that I had in processing all of the applications that came in, and I guess this is my fault because I should have asked someone to help me, but I processed all of these tens of applications by myself. But obviously, the first thing that stood out is when you ask for a POC cast, you need to be absolutely sure that no one is doing weirdness in your mentions. Because speaking candidly as the poetry editor of Fire, a magazine of Black speculative fiction, every once in a while when you open the slush to accept Black speculative poetry from writers from the African diaspora, a white university professor sends you photos of birds.
Not this white university professor, to be clear. Not me.
Not you.
I am a university professor and white, but I would not do that, and I reject utterly with prejudice. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So,
birds?
Very obviously, I was worried that...
Of birds.
Yes, that's happened. I've gotten photos of birds. I've gotten a collage of poems that are not speculative. There is...
Did the person who sent the pictures of birds say, by the way, what do you think about V.S. Naipaul? And with it, because that would explain a whole lot.
Hi. So I was very concerned about that, but it didn't happen, and thank the universe for that. The obvious things that I was looking for were experience streaming, not necessary, but a boon. Experience with Blades in the Dark, not necessary, but I'm actually looking for people who have no experience with Blades, because I need to know that the way that the game exists at the moment is easily possible by people who don't have Blades experience. People who are excited, because excitement does a lot, especially on a streaming, when actually being streamed live.
Yeah,
that's not only the engagement for the audience, but I need to be able to gauge that I'm still genuinely making something that can hold their interest in the first place. And whether the touchstones in particular are appealing to them, which led to the very interesting thing that happened in those applications, where several people went out of their way to let me know that they were practicing musicians, which was a thing that I thought, hey, this is a thing that I should probably select for, but it just turned out the way that I wanted to put the team together, that none of those folks fit. I'm also particularly grateful that there is queer representation on the crew as well, because that was a thing that I was consciously aware of as well. I didn't want to leave that out or have that not be considered.
Right.
As a queer person myself, I wanted to make sure that there was representation on that axis as well. And ultimately, I just wanted to make sure that it was a crew of people who whether they knew each other or not, and I was hoping that there would be as much of a distinction in terms of whether these players actually knew each other very well, that this would be an opportunity for them to bond through the game and an opportunity for me to gauge whether the way that the game exists, the way that I as a GM process the game is actually holding people's attention, because I'm trying to gauge in as many ways as possible that the
Sure.
game is genuinely engaging, and I want it to be as rewarding an experience for people as possible. That potentially, as a result, this becomes an opportunity for individuals to grow closer, because ultimately that's what we dig RPGs for in the first place: an
Yep.
opportunity for folks to bond, an opportunity for people to engage in a group activity that brings them together rather than tears them apart or exists to tear other people apart. And especially in 2020, I think we need more of that. So yeah.
I agree. Do you have any concern that, insofar as you engaged in a process very similar to the way that the Backstreet Boys were assembled, that they will be just? I'm just kidding. Never mind. It's just kidding. How dare you? No, I'm just joking. So no, that's amazing, and I really it leads to, unless you have anything else you want to say about that cast, which is amazing. I want to use that as a springboard to talk a little bit about game design in 2020 from a representational point of view. Good. Welcome in, by the way, Lone Wolf. And thanks everybody who's just come in. It's good to see everyone here. Again, this is episode 28 of Masters of the Dungeon. I am joined by guest star, Brandon O'Brien, and GM and creator of Sound Clash, the campaign, The Clampdown, beginning this Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on this channel, with the 4 players that have just been announced. And I was actually hoping that perhaps Arudnell / Dragonspear / Rock God, if one of my mods would be able to, maybe you can chat about this in Discord or whatever, put together a command for the crew for this, a bot command, like, and I don't know if you want to call it maybe Clash Crew. I think that might be a good idea. I was thinking Clamp Crew, but that worries me because I don't know, it sounds troubling. I don't know. I'm not entirely
Yeah,
sure.
just a little troubling.
A little troubling. So, or crew down is probably, the players don't want to think of themselves as being destroyed already. So I was thinking if we could do something like that, like Clash Crew, with the Twitter links that are above there. If one of you wonderful folks, Rudnell Dragon or Rock God, could do that, that would be awesome. And I do want to say that I'm hoping Rock God will be part, insofar as Rock God, of course, it comes by his name honestly, is not only, of course, a musician and loves music and like it did the photo shoot for my own band and all this kind of stuff, but is my go-to when it comes to certain aspects of a lot of different kinds of music. So yeah, I was gonna say I was hoping that you'd be here, Rock God, because I have much respect, sir, for the music knowledge. Anyway, so I guess what I want to ask, Brendan, if we can zoom out a little bit then, is a little bit about where you think we stand in the industry as a whole in terms of game design and representation. And by this, what I don't mean is what I worry sometimes becomes the case, which is a sort of like an industry bingo card where you go, all right, well, so this game covers, queer representation, and this game covers, non-binary, and this game is like, and everything is like its own little thing, and you almost feel like companies might be checking off the boxes in a way. I'm not really thinking about that. I'm wondering about, do you think there is more of an emphasis now on representation, on bringing players in, on bringing more people involved, on sort of widening the tent? Is there such a movement happening? And if so, do you think, are there pitfalls associated with that? Or do you think it's overall that things are getting to be in a better place? I guess I wanted your take on the state of the industry from that perspective, where it's not just the next medieval European, fantasy role-playing game that someone's building up.
So, my frustrating feeling in general, always in every creative space, is I want to be able to say that me and my friends who have been doing a great deal of very groundbreaking work exist in a healthy landscape that actually values their presence. But the fact of the matter is that Wizards of the Coast exists. And that sounds very mean, But ultimately, without getting into the nitty gritty of all of these individual things that have um, affected marginalized creators and marginalized players
Mm-hmm.
in this space, suffice it to say that the professional landscape is still very, very harsh. It's still very, very hard for folks to survive, let alone like be valued and respected as they survive. Um, 2020 has been the very weird year in general in all creative spaces of people putting up their BLM banners and saying that we're going to open our emails to multiple multiply marginalized individuals to start putting their work in, only for us to arrive in August and go, I didn't see your email, or this isn't the kind of thing that we're looking for at the moment, but we'll keep you in mind for next year. Or the fact that you didn't send us an application in May means that the window is now closed and we're never going to consider you again,
Yeah.
even though you're still Black and you've still been struggling in the industry before this point. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the indie industry exists, and people have been doing really radical work in this space as a result. I know a lot of my colleagues have been making really radical work on it, or starting Kickstarters for work that I think is really going to be groundbreaking, and I hope that those things do well, and I hope that people get to see those things. But at the end of the day, that's not everything else, and everything else is still deliberately going out of its way to exclude us, even when it says that that's not its intention. Um, and that's really tiring and frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't like, as a creator on the inside, I don't ever want to sound like I'm bitter about being here, because I'm not bitter about being here. I'm bitter about feeling like that this space doesn't want me here. And at that point, I only have two choices. I could either leave, or I could kick the door down and ensure that nobody can kick me out. And at this point, I'm ready to start unscrewing hinges. So that's how I feel about it.
Amen to that. And that's, in a way, that's exactly that's funny. I mean, that's exactly what this game is. I mean, in a way, right? I mean, it in feel, in sort of approach, it is itself kind of a declaration, of existence. Even though, as we said, it's not setting specific and all that. I think that's kind of the dodge. People will be like, hey, wait, but where does it show this? And you're not, again, it's not a bingo card. But it is a declaration of, hey, by the way, so I am 100%, in agreement on that score. And I'm glad that you're not leaving. I'm glad that you're kicking the door down instead. I'm glad. So then I guess that leads to the question of, what then is the obligation, do you think, of, I guess what I would say as a designer of color, what do you think you feel? Because I've also heard this, and I've talked with folks about this too, designers of color, about the feeling, this also, as you know, happens in our other space. One of our other spaces, the speculative writing space, which is, I don't want to have to just write about aspects of my specific, racial or cultural heritage, because that's like my only lane, like that's the claim, like, well, just that's your lane. Like, I would like to be able to write about other things without people being like, but wait, could you write more about, this particular, like, that's not, that's utterly unfair. And again, it's limiting again what you're able to do. So I guess what I would ask is, do you have a sense, is there in your view a responsibility of what you want to be able to do to inspire, to mentor, to bring forward other game designers from marginalized communities, or other players of marginalized communities? Do you feel that as a responsibility, or do you think it's a responsibility on everybody, and it's just your job to kind of remind people once in a while, hey, like, other people need to do that too, if you follow what I mean?
So when you said that, it immediately reminded me of a thing that I keep telling people about the genre writing space, about the science fiction and fantasy writing space, which
Right.
is um, ultimately white people have the privilege of never having to think about what they make.
Yep.
Um, and that means from a marginalized perspective, I not only am aware of the fact that folks go out of their way to insist that I have a lane and that I could be driving too slow in the lane because they've already selected their X work from people of this marginalization and they're not looking for more.
Right.
But that even when I attempt to write in that lane, when I attempt to make in that lane, there are ways that I can do it that are wrong, that
Okay.
are dictated by communities that have nothing to do with me. But when I attempt to do those things as genuinely as possible, it becomes too expensive, or too frustrating,
Yep.
or they don't want to expend the energy. Like, I had the most emotional experience this morning, and I'm going to plug this because I care a lot about the fact that this is existing. Um, Pseudopod or pseudopod.com just put out a short story by Susan Palumbo, who's a Trinidadian Canadian writer of fantasy and horror, brilliant writer, that is set in Trinidad, includes Trinidad folklore. Pseudopod went out of their way to ask for um, a Trinidadian narrator to read it, and I recommended a friend of mine, another poet here in Trinidad named Ariel John. And hearing the actual reading this morning when it came out, like, I know Ariel, I've heard Ariel read things before, but knowing that uh, a writer from the Trinidadian diaspora got a Trini to read her story, and that I was hearing
Hmm.
Trini characters in a Trini voice,
Yeah. Of
did
course.
things to me.
I can only
And
imagine. Of course. Yeah.
and like, the frustrating thing is, I don't think that it should be our responsibility. I do not think that it should be marginalized creators' responsibility to have to do anything. I think it should be the world's responsibility to be as open as possible.
Right.
Um, that's where I put my foot down, essentially. But ultimately, um, I do have to acknowledge that I don't have a choice. If I wait for somebody else to do the right thing, and this goes for like everything in general, if I wait for somebody else to do the right thing, then other people are going to continue getting hurt until somebody else feels as frustrated as I do. So I might as well just do something with my frustration. And I shouldn't have to. I'm going to remind people constantly I shouldn't have to. It's like um it's like you're going to the mall or you're going to the supermarket and the um, automatic doors don't open. You can hold them open, but they don't open. And you are aware of the fact that there are dozens of people who don't look like you who are just watching you hold open this door and going, look at him, he's holding the door open. Why is he holding the door open? Why doesn't he just like come inside? And I'm looking at them going, well, you could fix the door, please. Because I still want everybody else to get the opportunity to be inside.
Right. And
And
you
that's
and you
frustrating,
wouldn't
and I
mind going.
shouldn't have to hold the door open,
Right.
but the
Right.
door has to open.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is a great analogy. And you wouldn't, and frankly, you wouldn't mind being inside yourself and not having to be the one
I'd
holding
like
the
to
door.
be inside
Yeah.
where it's cold and where I don't have to think about the way to this door.
I.
Somebody has to hold the door open.
I'm,
This business is frustrating.
I know it,
And
man. I know it.
and like, we are in this awkward position very obviously of being pumped about this game because we know that whenever we're not talking about this game, we're going to be talking about this frustration, which is very frustrating and very tiring. I
Yeah.
feel the same way very often whenever fire comes up in a public conversation, because so often the conversation about Black voices in speculative literature is about whether they exist or whether they're valuable, or how much work Black writers have to do in order to be valued.
Right.
When instead, You could just read an issue of Fire and go, hey, this story was dope.
Yep.
And think just about the fact that Black writers are writing dope work. I'd love to get to that point where we never have to think about this suffering anymore and just say, Black creators are making dope things. Queer creators are making dope things. Dope things are being made outside of the US and Europe. But somebody has to hold open the door.
It's a tremendous analogy. It reminds me, I had a chance to watch again about 2 days ago. I was watching the famous debate between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley at the Oxford Union. And if anyone gets a chance to watch that, it's on YouTube. It's available, the whole thing, from the late 1960s. And Baldwin more or less is arguing in a very similar vein to this, although, with somewhat different kind of particulars. And it is amazing to me, 1968. So, have things changed? Yes. But you go back, but the same patterns, continue to appear. And I can only imagine the sort of wearisome nature about it. And the only way I'm able to imagine it is because I've heard it, from those folks, and I'm able to acknowledge that thing exists. So I will not dwell then on more of the weariness, except to say that it's a great analogy. And one of the reasons I hope people watching this will sort of take this into account is that this is why these things matter. It's not, the idea is not, watch this because the game was made by a marginalized creator with blah, 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 blah. That is not the point. The point is the game is an amazing, awesome, tremendous game. And also, if you would extend your sight beyond the handful or so, essentially, white, non-marginalized creators from the United States and Europe, you would be able to see how many more of those things not only exist now, but have been existing historically that you just didn't pay attention to, right, or notice. And so that, there's nothing else to say except that, I guess.
Like, one of the things that matters to me a lot, and like part of the reason why I generally think that every engagement that I've had in the chat on your channel has been remarkably pleasant and inspiring, is that you asked me about this game. You asked me, hey, do you want to do a series for this channel? I said yes. I very strongly remember on Discord going, I'm not sure how this might go, but I just want to pitch this thing to you, and you being hella excited about this game. And then I described it to the chat, and the chat got very excited about this game. And not once has it been about anything other than, this game sounds rad. Yeah. I like that. I like knowing that the things that I make are valuable because they're valuable. That matters to people in general.
Yep. And I'm glad. And I have to say, it was funny because when JulyCon, which of course you know all about, when JulyCon happened and when I had some people who were commenting about that, one of the things they said was they were like, I'm glad that we were able to make a convention in which you had a, somewhat diverse group of people that was able to talk about things, including panels about something other than diversity. And I was like, yeah, because these are colleagues of mine and in many cases friends and people who are gifted and talented, people that need to be seen and have their work seen, and not so that you can then shelve them in the equivalent of the African American literature section on a shelf in a bookstore, by which I do not in any way mean to invalidate that idea. What I'm invalidating is the idea that you ought to put them back on a shelf and then forget about them, which is what happens in bookstores all the time. And so that is what I don't want, because like you said, I forget who it was. It might've been Incredible Inedible who was talking about your Magic the Gathering point, Brandon, and was saying, when let me scroll up too, because I think it's still.
That was the Neoncaster.
Yeah, it was Neoncaster. I'm sorry. Who said, that Kaladesh's setting is layered in elves and dwarves. Would Hindu mythology not sell? I mean, and that's true, because have you seen the level of how amazingly rich, incredibly rich, these storytelling mechanisms and the fabric that exists within Hinduism and Buddhism and on and on and on, that is not just layered from the same kind of, medieval Christian Judeo perspective. It just amazing to me that it wouldn't be thought of. This is incredibly exciting just as a world, as people being like, I want to see more of that. Forget about anything else. So anyway,
I mean, again, one of the things that one of the things that we lose when we have these kinds of when people don't have these kinds of conversations is that when we consider diversity, we're not just considering the like visual kinds of limiting perspectives of diversity of let's just make sure that we have X brown person
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this
exactly.
but it's also the diversity of thought that comes from accepting that people are multifaceted.
Yep.
Like the example that we have of the fact that people are multifaceted is that I didn't learn until tonight that you, an individual I already knew was a literature professor, read Naipaul, a thing that should have been obvious to me because you're a university literature professor. But
Yeah.
because of the ways that we limit the engagement that people have with multiple perspectives, with multiple layers of history, with multiple experiences, not only physical experiences that they've had with their own body, but things that they've witnessed, things that they've learned, things
Yes.
that they've known,
Yes.
gets in the way of us being able to acknowledge that individuals make really dope things when you give them the opportunity to simply experience and express the things that matter to them as individuals.
Totally agree. And to get back to the game point of view, the thing that I want to say about what's so exciting about doing this in the game space, I think, and I'm curious. Actually, we'll do this before we pivot to taking questions from chat. I want to put out a premise and see what you think. There is the potential, as much as I love writing, and I really consider myself kind of a hybrid professionally. Like besides the university professor thing as a teacher, but I consider myself a writer and a gamer. And those two things, I used to be very much like afraid to admit the gaming part because I was like, well, but that's not serious, right? And then later on, I was like, yeah, but if I look at my world growing up, my world really was invested essentially in terms of my creative life with music, writing, and gaming. Like those were the three things. And so what I'm curious about here is whether there's the potential for gaming because of its dynamism, because of its collaborative nature, because of the fact that it's not fully scripted, because of the fact that it has emotional beats driven by the engagement that a game in some ways can uniquely provide. Is there the chance that a game can get across what we've been talking about even more effectively than writing can in some ways? And I don't want you to just, you don't have to say like, well, yes or no. I mean, like, please expound on it. I'm just curious whether there's something unique about games, tabletop games specifically, role-playing games, that can help bring forward some of what we've been discussing.
Right. So what I think so I spend a lot of time when it comes to tabletop RPGs, I spend comparing to theater. And I'm sure that that's like very obvious to a lot of people, especially like theater practitioners who have more experience than I do, because I've never like I I consider myself a performer, but I don't like consider myself an actor the way that some of my friends do.
Right.
But I work a lot with actors. I work a lot with directors. Spoken word in Trinidad and Tobago is very connected
Yeah.
to the theater scene, and I'm sure it's connected to the theater scene elsewhere as well. Um, so I spend a lot of time thinking a lot about the fact that um, tabletop RPGs are just improv.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that a good enough establishment, a good enough setting, a good enough premise has the potential to ask players as a result to think more deeply about the way that they view themselves, not only as the PC that they made and what the cultural signifiers that they've attached to this PC and how they view those signifiers and attempt to value those signifiers, but how they see themselves externally as someone performing certain acts, how they see how they see the NPCs that they meet as they interact with them, how they see the value of the interactions that they have in certain kinds of conflict-ridden situations.
Right.
Um, and as a result, you get to even if it doesn't like perfectly help anybody ask or answer any of these questions, the process of wanting to ask or answer any of these questions is itself a process of working through assumptions that you would have made before you got to the campaign. I think of Benjamin Rosenbaum's Dream Apart,
Mm-hmm.
the companion to Avery Alder's Dream Askew, where players are residents of a Jewish shtetl. And even though the rules don't ask you to go out of your way to like specifically envision, like to try to role play being Jewish in this historical context,
Yep.
the game is still asking you to consider very deeply. You are in this circumstance. What does it mean to be in this circumstance when these things happen? When conflict appears in your space, when um, your safety or your dignity or the safety and dignity of others in your space is being threatened, when you have to negotiate gaining peace in a certain context. Uh, like, what does that mean for you on through the understanding that this is the person who you are in this place? And I think that while I think that it's perfectly unfortunately perfectly possible for somebody to decide, you know what, I'm not going to learn anything from this procedure, I'm just going to play the game and have fun, I still want to believe that some part of the way that you have to engage with those games as a result naturally comes with asking the question, well, I didn't do this thing not just because it wasn't fun, but because doing this thing was not the fun that was called for. And I made the decision that it wasn't the fun that was called for
Right.
because I'm trying to inhabit this world as truly as possible.
Right. Yeah.
You'd be amazed exactly how many, what's the word that people use in D&D, murder hobos?
Yeah.
How many murder hobos, when you put them in a circumstance that genuinely asks them something deep and thoughtful about the context that they're in, will go, you know, when we leave this scene, I'm gonna go back to having the weird and silly fun that I planned, but it wasn't necessary at this point in time, and I made the decision on my own
Yep.
because you gave them the proper context in order to engage with those things.
That's well said, and I think that's a critically important skill, both as a game master and also as a game designer, to be able to produce the context, as you say, for that thoughtfulness to take place. And that, in a way, that's sort of what we're talking about, right? It's oftentimes you hear this thing about GMs not wanting GMs and or designers to railroad, not wanting people to railroad. The better answer really is, are you giving people context within which thoughtful questions will naturally occur? And for me, having moments like that you set up and then from a game mastering point of view, get the hell out of the way and allow them to sort of see and come to some kind of understanding of stuff is enormously powerful. It's establishing context and getting the hell out of the way. And incidentally, that's the exact same principle to the best as the best educational principles that exist, which is you create a context for learning and then you get the hell out of the way, as opposed to, you know, handing them stuff like they're little baby birds, the students, right? And just opening mouth and then pouring in knowledge and then closing the baby birds' mouths. That accomplishes nothing in terms of retention, does nothing pedagogically. But if you can set up a context within which they ask themselves these questions and then get the hell out of the way, the quality of what is left, what they learn for themselves, and the fact that you've then literally created a neural pathway that they will want to do that again and again and again. This is why education, folks, just for a second, I think Brandon will indulge me for a second. This is why education is fundamentally radical. It's fundamentally radical because at its best, it causes people to think, what if? This is the principle behind, for example, we were talking about Brathwaite earlier today. This is the principle behind why Carnival in Haiti was one of the things that the French colonials wanted to crack down on first. Why? Because Carnival in Haiti made people think, what if? And if you are a new dictatorial, we want to create a whole new mindset and have you play cricket and do all these things that are not necessarily Haitian in origin or whatever, you don't want people to think, what if? You don't want people to think, what happens if I imagine imagine myself as the ruler instead of the ruled? What if I imagine that there are no rulers at all? What if I imagine the existence of the landed class is not there anymore, and instead we have a completely egalitarian society, or whatever, right? You don't want people in this regard thinking for themselves. And that's why I think theater is fundamentally radical and dangerous. I've written, my academic work really dealt with this question of liminal space and about the radicalness of academics, but specifically that aspect of the getting out of the way, so that once you've given them context, so that then people can think for themselves. That's dangerous. You don't want people thinking for themselves, right? So
No, and I wanna follow that up in an RPG context, because I think about these things a lot when I'm running
please.
The Case of the Ascended Seal, or Blades of the Dark,
yes, please,
campaign, which I love. I've gotten to the point where, as an aside, I've gotten to the point in the process of talking about the Case of the Ascended Seal where I've gone from initially pitching this to you as a short mini-series to pretty confidently saying that it's probably never going to end, and I'm fine with that.
Wasn't even part of my plan.
But when you, like, to the idea of getting out of the way, one of the things that I try as much as possible to consider very deeply as a GM in that game is to know what matters to characters, even if it matters just a little bit, and finding ways to let that guide those characters to certain decision points, and then just waiting to see what decision they'd make as a result, because that further informs as a result how they feel about this thing and how that thing matters to them. One of the moments that obviously stood out to me was as we were getting into the early points of session 6, when I asked Ashlyn Faros, Iori Kusano's character,
right,
how they felt about their relationship to Savarosi religion, and then just constantly put Savarosi religion in their space, just to determine how they would feel about being in this space, being constantly guided by this vague superstition that they had already given up on, that has become a part of their work, and how it informs their relationship to Crossroads as the unknowing beacon of religious imagery.
Yeah.
And how that guides the way that the rest of the team engages with everything that just happened, because we're having this revelation minutes after a man just died.
Yep.
And I like finding those kinds of moments, and that matters to me from an educational perspective, because the thing that I think is most important when it comes to education as a process is finding ways to attach the thing that someone is attempting to learn to their own values, their own concerns, the things that matter most to them.
Right.
So not only is that self-directed, but getting out of the way encourages them to ask interesting questions about how those things interact, that give you an opportunity to engage with them, not as someone who is simply giving them answers, but as someone who is giving them as many engaging opportunities as possible to continue self-directing in that process.
And the interesting thing about that, and thanks, Rock God, we will post that again just in a moment. The interesting thing about that to me is that I don't know if initially, when these characters were coming together, if we knew how much Crossroads was going to become sort of the spiritual center of the group, which is odd for a creature that is totally made of meat, but might be a little hollow otherwise. But the idea that the Crossroads became kind of the pivot point, which is not in any way to minimize the other characters, but it's just Crossroads became sort of the point around which a lot of the other players sort of considered how they were going to interact with the world. And Crossroads' interaction with the world, because it's so unusual and slightly not quite on center and all that sort of thing. Also because Yoi's doing a very good job playing Crossroads too. But that I think was an interesting thing to me about you were willing to also let that develop because it was so obviously player directed, right? It wasn't that you were like, oh, the most interesting character here is obviously this one, so I'm going to go like the characters themselves were like, tell me more about, holding on to crickets and then using them to destroy things, and or tell me more about the awkwardness that I was reminded a lot. I think a lot about, and maybe this just because I love this book, but I think a lot about Murderbot and All Systems Red and the kind of awkwardness of Murderbot and how much that ties in a little bit to me for how Crossroads feels for me. But that was you getting out of the way and allowing the players to make the decision about what drove them. So I think that's also to your credit as a game master, kind of knowing to just, step back and let them move things forward.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they're doing all the work. I'm pretty sure we can have a session of the Case of Descended Seal where Crossroads just engages with the universe and I get to drink a cup of tea.
Yeah.
It's
just
perfectly possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately, the players are the ones doing the work. And my job is to simply give them things to interact with. And because they're so good, because they're so engaging about the characters that they're playing, it gives me multiple opportunities to engage with those things. Whenever Crossroads stumbles upon something that it's having difficulty interacting with, I'll just ramp up the necessity of interacting with the thing.
Exactly.
Whenever Ring is in the vicinity of a possibility of gaining information or something that may have a connection to the war, Mike goes out of his way to let me know this is going to be a dramatic moment, and I just get to go, well, this is the drama that you're going to experience. I like one of the things that I was particularly noteworthy that was particularly noteworthy to me, and I felt really proud for noticing it. And I guess that's, as an aside, I'll just make a note to the chat that one of the most delightful experiences as a GM is when you learn something. Because in the process between session 6 and session 7, it had only just occurred to me how much of Skelly's attachment to food was a relationship to scarcity and not just a gag that was taking place in the game. And when I noticed that, I was like, I know that there's going to be a point where I have to emphasize that in game. We just need to get to a point where that can matter outside of a personal experience that you already know. So I get to see how you'd interact with this issue surrounded by people who don't know you and will not be a source of comfort. Yeah. And how other characters will engage as a result. I'm perfectly confident that if I put Skelly in a situation where they need to decide what they want to eat, surrounded by the wealthy in Duskfall, Crossroads' first instinct will be to juice a member of the landed gentry, and I'd be excited to see it, to see yet another person burst into heat and light in a crowded ballroom because it didn't want Skelly to be frustrated about food.
Yeah, and it's
when when you see those things and you just not just seen in a certain way and then just step back again is really, really engaging, because it means that the thing that I get as a GM is to learn about my characters. And especially as a writer and a reader, as someone who cares about lore, that's what I'm here for. Yeah. I'm here to watch you all tell me a story, please.
Yep, 100%.
Really and cool.
There's and that's one of the wonderful sort of dynamism, again, that I always think about with the dynamism of these games, that you really get the chance to, as you say, not just learn about the characters, but learn about how that will impact the story and why it matters. And a lot of that is as we've talked about on this show many times, chat, is about having trust and faith in your players. And there is at least initially, when you're first starting out as a game master, there is a risk associated with it, and it's a risk that a lot of game masters shy away from. I do not particularly love direct conflict with things. Like in my personal life, I mean, I just don't. I don't love doing it. There have been times where I've had to, but it's not what I like to do. Standing up for myself and for others when I think is necessary, yes. But direct conflict, I don't. For multiple reasons, I don't love it. But there was a time when I would not have allowed players to get into conflicts with each other because of my fear that was going to, first of all, spread out into the player realm, not just the character realm, but also that it was getting away from what we were hoping to do, which is we're all working together. But my undercutting it or short-circuiting that means that there's never going to be an opportunity for them to come through common vulnerabilities and common triggers and work through them in such a way that they then understand much more about the way the other person is thinking and feeling. So that, for example, for those of you who watch the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, watching the fight between, Ryuvi, for example, and Cade, watching them basically like almost come to blows, and in the end, being among the tightest, most closely connected characters in the group, precisely because I didn't let my fear cause me to jump in and be like, wait, right? And it meant that they got to do something, and I learned, as you just said, Brandon, from them about the kinds of characters that they were, because they were with some measure of friction with each other. Organically, I didn't create the friction. I didn't put them in a situation where I was like, you will fight. They came to this on their own because they had engaged with their characters, and they worked through it on their own, and that kind of trust is, when it works that way, is extraordinary, because it leads to far deeper and more fulfilling role-playing and far deeper and fulfilling storytelling that, as you say, you can just get to watch happen, from a distance. So
yeah, that's the way that I view this process now. And now that we've said it aloud, it means that I've realized something about all of the games that I haven't enjoyed playing in as well. And it essentially just boils down to the fact that whenever a GM thinks that they know something, rather than being put in a position to learn something, that game immediately goes terribly.
Yep.
I've played in games where the GM is confident that they want to go down a certain route and don't care a whit about my character's natural motivations. The worst gaming experience I've ever had in my life was a D&D campaign where after losing all of my HP attempting to save someone from a fire, I am spending several beats in this voice chat trying to let my DM know as descriptively as possible that the thing that matters to me the most is that I've died an honorable death and someone will let my loved ones know. And that goes so terribly because my DM doesn't care that I'm resurrected, turned into a zombie, and possessed by the devil in the process of dying. And I'm like, why is this the thing that mattered to you? Why didn't you just let me die so I could do the thing? And I just make another character and then we could do whatever weirdness you had in mind. But yes.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts, physically hurts.
And I'm sure everybody has a story like that, where ultimately the issue is the GM knows what they want instead of caring what players want.
I mean, to which the answer is, so write a book. Right? Write a goddamn book. Write a poem. Write a story. It's not, and sometimes I think people can hear that and misunderstand. The argument is not that DMs and GMs are not important for games like this. I think that for these kinds of games, they are extremely important, but they're extremely important because they're creating the conditions under which wonderful collaborative storytelling can happen. That is not the same thing as just running roughshod over the desires of the player and being like, okay, so here's how this is all gonna play out ultimately. That they just, especially when, it's just, anyway.
And I also want to qualify that it's perfectly possible for a GM to have a table that is like the worst experience for them to GM because all of their individual decisions are similarly running roughshod over the world and the intentions that you have for the world that you had in mind.
Right.
And both of those things are equally untenable. But when the lowest common denominator is the DM, that means that they have a responsibility to just make better decisions about the
Right.
game. If the whole table doesn't want to play the game that you wanted to play, then that was a discussion that should have been had before everybody sat down.
That's it.
But if everybody sat down and wanted the game that they wanted to play, and you decided that you wanted to do another thing with all of their bodies, then the only person who's playing the game that they want to play is you.
Yep.
And you could have played that by yourself.
Absolutely. That's so well said. And again, I won't get too far down this list, but chat, you'll remember that a few months ago, Dot and I had this big discussion about the incident that happened with Adam Coble. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Brandon.
I am.
Okay. So that, and I mean, I lit into him repeatedly because it was an abomination to GMing. It is the worst thing to do. But one of the reasons that it's bad is not just because it's assault. There's all kinds of reasons it's bad. But on top of it, it's exactly what you just said. It is a person who's like, for the sake of this subtext, hold on a second. Yes? You going to sleep? Okay. Good night, baby. Sleep well. Sorry, it's my daughter. Always have to say goodbye. Good night to her. So in the service of this joke, which subtext was a terrible joke and was dumb and was not funny. In addition to that, in service of this joke, the person was willing to utterly ignore feedback from the players, utterly ignore response from everyone around, utterly ignore and find it funny, not only just at the time, but over the course of the description of this assault. And then afterwards, when we're doing they're doing the post game, and he's going through, well, I bet you don't want to talk to me, ha 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 ha, like just staggeringly inept, on top of being abusive, unethical, and wrong. On top of everything else, it's just absolutely inept. And it's not I slipped and said a word I shouldn't have said. Like, again, no one's perfect, although the words that people usually are worried about saying are things that don't float around my head on a regular basis. So I don't know why it's so, but regardless, forget that. This isn't even just a one-time thing or a one-moment thing. This is something which had to be prepared, had to be planned, took time to render in game, and then was talked about afterwards. I mean, it's just mind-blowing to me, and it goes right along with what you said, because it is, again, dismissing agency and doing so that you get to have your own individual fun. Like it's self-pleasuring in the game space. And I mean that in the nastiest conceivable way, because that's how it came across in that environment. So, yeah.
I have so many very hostile, when it happened, I only knew about the GM in question. In passing, I hadn't encountered any of their work at that point. I knew that it existed and I wasn't going out of my way to see it. And then it happened. And my immediate first thoughts were, first, very obviously, I hope as a GM, I never get to the point where I'm so excited about a small thing in my game that I forget the lines and veils that I've already discussed with players.
Absolutely.
But also, there is, and I mean, again, it speaks to insisting upon the things that you know instead of trusting characters to just display the kinds of things that they already care about and value. But part of the trust proposition of being a GM is not just you are in control of these characters and the world that they're in, but you are in a position of trust for these players.
Yeah.
Such that for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, nobody's even going to ask any questions about your decisions until after the game is done. So when you do something like that, and I mean, when there is the cold comfort of the fact that that was the last thing that had happened in that session, because heaven forbid that happened an hour into a 4 hour session and you just had to sit there and go, y'all really did that to me and no one said anything, and
Yeah.
I'm still supposed to play this game
Yeah.
because it's live and people are watching me for entertainment. And like, that is a dreadful thing to happen when you're a live entertainment stream.
Yep.
Like, at a table, you could just get up and leave. Like, it's just so
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. It's a violation of trust, and it's something that a supposedly gifted, experienced DM had no business being within 100 miles of, and that's why I was very harsh about it afterwards. It's like, this person should leave for a long time, and I will notice, by the way, that they didn't, and they came back around and are now starting to make comments again. I'm like, please go away again. You are, I mean. I won't get into a discussion of cancel culture. This is a person who deserves to be canceled, at least as far as that's concerned, for years. And the reason is because it's not only premeditated, but it shows that you just can't trust someone who would do that without a lot of work that someone is not going to put in 2 months of being quiet on Twitter. You know, like no.
Like,
yes, that's good. The social contract was shredded. That's very well said. Incredible and edible. Yes, shredded completely.
Like, you know what's the thing that bothered me the most about that situation? It's that, like, I could perfectly, in an ideal world, I have a lot of grace in my heart. I keep realizing when it comes to things like this. Because in an ideal world, I could perfectly understand you made a mistake and you forgot what was behind the line. It happened in a spur of the moment, and by the time that the session was about to end, you decided, let's just wrap this up and come to terms with the fact that I made a bad decision. That's not what happened.
No.
Hours afterward, you didn't realize that something was wrong.
Yep.
And then when you apologized, you didn't apologize for the fact that this was a thought that came naturally to mind.
Right. You apologize for the fact that the safety tool, that you didn't have enough safety tools. I'm like, this is not about having enough safety tools. This is about what the hell are you doing with this thought in your head and thinking that's like,
it can't even be about not having safety tools, because they immediately discussed afterwards that they let folks know, I don't want to do sex things in this game.
Yeah.
Folks knew. You can't say you didn't know.
Yeah.
So the question isn't about whether you forgot, because that's a completely different matter.
Right.
It's, why was this the joke that came to mind
Absolutely.
in the first
place? 100%. Yep. And
why did it take you 4 hours to realize that joke didn't land? It's like,
and I think this is well said, and I want to move to questions here in just a minute. But this thing that we're pointing about, I think, if I want to sort of tie a little bit of what we talked about together, you talked about grace, and I think that's well said, and I want to broaden it, if I may, a little bit. We're talking here about generosity of spirit. I think game mastering, the best game mastering, is about generosity of spirit. It's about every player and the game master collectively in a generous spirit, wanting to experience a collaborative story together, a story which is larger because it incorporates all of people's inputs and ideas. And when it's done in the live streaming space, which I've been doing now for many years, it can also include the viewer reaction to that as well. It's about the live energy of the space. Everyone goes into it with an understanding that we are going to, at times, put parts of our own individual things to the side, and we're going to do this or whatever, because we are going to be generous of spirit to and with each other. We are going to express ourselves generously. Yes, that's important. But we're going to do it with an understanding that we are all going to work on this together. The greatest sin, in a way, of what was done in that situation was it was a creation of meanness of spirit to me, of making it all about, this is my joke, and I'm going to make my joke, which, as you just said, somehow that was the joke that I thought was funny, which is deeply problematic. But I'm going to make it my joke, instead of the generosity of spirit that comes from the best role-playing, where everyone had a seat at the table and contributed to it equally. Even if one person, one character, has more of the spotlight for a given session or two and everyone steps back, that too is about generosity of spirit and trust that, in quotes, their time will come to shine, and that the group as a whole is telling a better story, which is why, to come back to the case of the Cindered Seal, that game works really well because there is a generosity of spirit, where all of the players are saying collectively, and you as the GM, Brandon, are saying collectively, we want to generously give of each other and listen to each other and of ourselves. That is the opposite of a pre-planned, individual focused, I think it's funny, so I'll tell the joke no matter what the hell you people think, which is what this other situation was. And that's the thing I think that really angered me above everything else, lack of consent. I mean, there were so many things that angered me, but that in particular, it is a reduction, a meanness of spirit, which to me is the opposite of what makes me love role-playing and tabletop role-playing and game mastering, because it's about generosity of spirit. And for the love of God, if you look at the world, what we need now is greater generosity of spirit. We see what happens when meanness of spirit is in control. So, anyway.
And I mean, part of the reason why that matters to me, to get back to like the fact that it was a joke. If you want to tell your own joke, tell your own joke, and deal with the fact that your joke wasn't funny.
Right.
Don't make other people stick around for your joke.
Don't make other people tell your joke for you, to you, almost, right? Yeah.
Comparatively, I didn't make the word crickets. I just had to deal with the fact that the word crickets exists. And we have to deal with the verb to crickets.
And now that's a thing, and that's,
Yeah, and that was the innate process of players engaging with a decision that I didn't think was going to evolve to that point. And characters just made their decisions, and I facilitated that decision. Similarly, when someone obviously makes a decision that they don't want to be present for a thing, don't force the thing.
Don't force the thing. Yep, I couldn't agree more. Okay, so this is I could talk about this all night. This is
what we have discovered is that we are in a position to consistently have all kinds of conversations on a regular basis, and I'm very eager to return for the episode of Masters of the Dungeon where we talk about V.S. Naipaul.
Yeah, man, I'm here for it. V.S. Naipaul and Trinidad in theater and governmental of resistance through theatrical narrative. Yeah. Anyway, but that is for another show. All right. Before we let Brandon go, though, I do want to give chat a chance to ask a few questions because I know we had some good ones. So, chat, I know there were a couple in there. What I would ask, please, is if you would not mind, please just type in all caps question, and then colon, and then the question that you would like to ask. Please do that in chat, and we will immediately consider that question, and we'll address a few of these before I let Brandon go, who has been, speaking of generous of spirit, has also been generous of time in allowing me more time than would normally happen for the show. But this is what happens when you get us talking about this stuff. You're glad to add crickets to my dialogue. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
I wanted to pick out a question, one of the very early questions, Incredible and Edible. Made a question very early in the chat. Is Soundclash going to use specific skills like percussion or more general terminology like rhythm? This was a thing that was really paining me in the process, because as I was imagining character the very first time, I was like, I'm going to make character sheets for every individual variation of a musician that could possibly exist, and then I realized that's actually a lot of individual work.
Yep.
And what emerged in the process was thinking about generalizations in as dynamic a way as possible. So Soundclash only has 4 character sheets: harmony, melody, rhythm, and beat. All of those are traditional Blades in the Dark character sheets, except for the fact that beyond the special abilities that already exist in Blades in the Dark, the very first ability that they get to choose is one of 3 that once they choose one of those abilities, they can't pick the other 2. So there's variation between those 2 roles. And depending on whether you are a primary or secondary performer in that role in your band, you get 1 extra action dot. So, for instance, I'm actually going to pull up the table that I have designed for this in order to like make sense of this.
Okay.
Um, because it actually turns out to be a very involved process as a result. Um, but if you, for instance, are a melody performer, if you're the lead, you get an extra dot in a tune. But if you aren't, you get an extra dot in study.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
that
That's great.
yeah, so there are constant variations in terms of are you the lead singer? Are you the rhythm guitarist? You get an extra dot in this place. Um, if there are two harmonies or two rhythms, you get to pick different additional opening abilities that get to differentiate the way that you engage with certain issues in certain ways. Plus, every individual instrument is going to have its own special ability tied to it. So that means not only that you get to open with three abilities, but it's perfectly possible that people with the same role can have various differentiations in that regard as well.
That's
And
that.
then I have to think about the band sheets, which is for every individual um genre of music that can potentially exist, which that is going to be a completely different, that is going to be where the real drama comes in. There are going to, like, my goal is to fulfill, to get as many of those things as possible. I promised someone in the early stages of this game that I needed to make a hard style crew sheet. I don't know what hard style is, but now I'm locked in. I have to do that.
We,
So yeah.
so we've got, yeah, and see, and like, because now in Soundclash is punk associated exclusively, or just
It is not.
okay? So then, just I'm going to throw in a note, just a request for a little bit of jazz and also progressive. If you could just do a little
Oh
progressive
yeah,
rock in there,
definitely,
just a
definitely,
bit.
definitely. Jazz was one of the early things that were on the list. Um, I know that I need to do calypso at some point. Calypso is
Yeah,
gonna be a doozy.
hell yeah.
I am fully prepared to take on that challenge. Yeah, I'm like the crew sheets, the band sheets. I'm very excited about because it gives you an opportunity to think about what you think this genre of music means and does,
Yeah, that's great. Oh,
in ways that I think would be really engaging. I'm actually very curious when it physically exists, because I'm not gonna do all of those band sheets immediately. I'm immediately curious what other people's ideas of certain
yep.
genres through Blades in the Dark mechanical language might be. Because like punk, the way that I imagine it right now, is very heavy in like prowess engagements, gives you lots of rec bonuses, gives you lots of um, physical capacities whenever you're challenging people of higher tiers than you, or immediately challenging the powers that be or the industry in certain ways. But a lot of those abilities, for instance, like one of the things that stood out to me when I was taking the note was there is an ability in the punk band sheet that gives you bonuses whenever you challenge the industry. But the name that I gave it when I wrote it in the middle of the night, drowsy in my bed, was Small Axe. Because when I wrote it down, I wasn't thinking of punk. I was thinking of Bob Marley. And when he wrote the song Small Axe, when
Oh,
Big Tree Records was dominating the reggae industry in Jamaica to the point where individual artists were literally struggling to get paid, get signed, and the fact that that song was immediately a reggae signifier of standing against the industry. So I know that that's going to
interesting.
appear in reggae as well.
That's
But it
interesting.
shows up in punk because it's also punk. And like the ways that those through lines exist, like I'm really like there are so many things when it comes to those like through lines that I'm really, really engaged in, and I'm really like eager to get to the point of imagining those things when the time comes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like Venn diagrams. I was thinking about um I was thinking about even Zydeco. The I was listening to the, as we talked about a couple of nights ago, the horrifically underrated Princess and the Frog, because my son is my 4-year-old is a big fan, which I'm encouraging because that movie is criminally underrated. But part of it is the music is dynamite. Like, not only did Randy Newman do it, I know everyone likes to dunk on Randy Newman. He did a tremendous job of that soundtrack, but that thing is filled with Zydeco in particular, and Bayou, just so much stuff. And I was thinking about how much that intersects with other forms of music, so that I could imagine these crew sheets having these kind of overlap, feels with other genres of music, which is itself fascinating, that people would be like, well, it's a little bit like this, but it's a little like this, and I dig that too. So anyway, oh man, that's just turns my crank. I just
as an aside, one of the things that even outside of thinking about Soundclash, there is this one musical thing that always really excites me whenever I think about it, which is I listen to a lot of Japanese hip hop. And one of the things that stood out to me very recently as I started getting into a lot of newer artists is that there is a legacy of Japanese hip hop that doesn't pass through New York hip hop, but attaches directly to the original source of hip hop, which is Jamaican toasting, such that there are Japanese hip hop artists who use the term Babylon in their lyrics. And when I heard that the first time, I heard there's a Japanese rapper called Hanya, who I love a lot, who did a track that was produced by a New York producer named Ski Beats for an anthology album called 24 Hour Karate School Japan. And in the middle of the first verse, he just says, F Babylon. And I'm like, did I hear that correctly? Very little English is in the song in general, so it just stood out to me. It's like, did you just do the thing? That's not a hip hop thing. No other hip hop artist is doing that. And then I just kept noticing it, and I was so enwrapped by that. So I'm so digging into that in particular and seeing the ways in which music is actually just one organism that is moving in different directions is actually really intriguing to me.
A long-standing conversation and which is shaped by all of its participants. Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so a couple more questions. Rudnell had, what are some good anthologies of Trinidadian spelling folklore you would recommend? I'm going to completely...
You got the spelling correctly, Rudnell.
I'm going to cede to Brandon on that.
So I know that there are very obvious kinds of secondary school answers that I can give. And I'm not going to give them very obviously. But this is not necessarily a folklore answer, but I do want to thoroughly plug a collection of Caribbean science fiction and fantasy edited by Karen Lord. The name of it is New Worlds, Old Ways, Speculative Tales from the Caribbean. I have a short story in it that is very futuristic Trinidad in its own way. It has a lot of folklore stories in it. It also has stories that engage with folklore, engage with historical, cultural Caribbeanness in new and fascinating ways. I mentioned this in particular because if I have the opportunity to plug at all, my local literature festival, the Bocas Lit Fest, is having its digital festival in September. And on September is the 16th or the 8th, right, on September the 18th, we're having an event called Future Friday, where several readers from that, several writers from that collection will be reading and reprinting some of their work. I have a story among them. A colleague of mine named H.K. Williams has a story in there that reimagines the Trinidadian folklore of eating cascadura And the myth of which is when you eat cascadura, you are doomed to return to the place that you ate it before you die. And it's the story of a woman discovering that the consequence of having eaten that when the world has sufficiently ended is now that she is immortal.
That's
And like
wow.
and like the entire collection, New Worlds Old Ways, is full of like really dramatic, really well done speculative re-engagements with the rules and understandings of folklore in a way that I think is really interesting and really engaging, even for people who have never encountered these folklore stories before. The publisher People Tree Press is um, in a publishing relationship with another publisher called Akashic Books that has a web series on their website called Duppy Thursday, which is a collection of other folklore flash fiction written by writers in the Caribbean. That is also definitely worth just cursory engagement whenever you have the time to just flip through online and read some original flash fiction, which I'm going to put the link for in the chat as well.
Yeah,
So
sorry,
yeah.
sorry, I jumped ahead of you on that. I was just so excited, I wanted to post it. The New World's Old Ways.
Oh no, not a problem at all. By all means.
So that's really super cool. Also, I wanted to say, speaking of Mike, Turbo Tango just resub. Thank you, Turbo Tango. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it for the resub, the 9-month resub. Better known as Mr. Michael R. Underwood. So Incredible Inedible also asks, the secret of game design is your game is actually about something not represented by the mechanics and themes, but rather the space where something would be. What is the hidden message of Sound Clash?
I mean, it's not very hidden. Don't trust the industry. Don't trust the powers that be. The game is very dangerously. I don't want to say that it's railroaded in this sense because obviously players could engage with the fact of how the game is played in any way that they want, but the way that the game is designed is very obviously still about three very distinct things. You're given an opportunity to do something that you love. The thing that you love is tainted by forces that are outside of your control, and you need to engage with those forces outside of your control in order to continue doing it. How do you feel about the fact that this is hostile to you? It is perfectly possible for you to play games of Sound Clash where you decide that you sell out, whatever that might mean for you, but the game is designed in such a way to remind you that the industry doesn't give a damn about you. How do you feel about that? Do you work harder to find value, or do you try to lash out at the fact that the industry genuinely doesn't care about you or the things that you want? If you do decide that you want to engage deeply with the industry and try your very best, what does that mean, and how does that affect your relationship with this thing that you love, that you claim to find ultimate value in? That's I shudder to say that anyone is playing Sound Clash that is not aware that that is the ultimate conflict. Because if you're playing Sound Clash because your goal is to have a happily ever after where Gem and the Holograms just play a kick-ass show and you never have to think about the industry ever again, unfortunately, the mechanics set you up in such a way that you have to deal with the fact that the industry doesn't care about you.
Yeah, recording industry simulator. There you go, Bruno. Yeah, it's just troubling. So before we do this, we'll do one more question and then we'll wrap. Before we do that, though, I did want to ask: would you mind putting, Brandon, the Twitter addresses, the info for all the folks? Hopefully with names in chat, because Rock God is going to put that into a bot command, and he got here after he only got like half the names. So would you be so kind as to do that? And while Brandon is doing that, The last, I was going to ask about the reading too, but that's awesome. I hope it went well. And yeah, I hear you, Turbo Tango. This is weird times. And the last question is, do you envision? It's interesting. Do you envision tier being tied to industry or fan base? Does tier even exist?
Right, tier does exist. This is a thing that I had to like ultimately figure out the way that this is balanced in the game because Blades has its own language, and I'm trying to develop my own language around these things. But essentially, in Sound Clash, there are two different kinds of social currency in the game. There is fame, and there is rep. Rep is essentially still rep, as it exists in Blades right now. But the way that you engage with rep is the way that the industry views you. If your rep is in the red, it means that the industry connects that you presently have don't trust you, don't like you, will go out of their way to put you in positions where you need to reaffirm your subservience to them. But when it's very good, they go out of their way to be helpful and productive. They will give you new gear. They will pay for you to go to places. And you will like benefit from that interaction. You'll benefit from your industry interactions when your rep is high. Fame is the way that fans see you. That like the way that I imagine it in my head, even though it doesn't physically exist that way on paper right now, is that fame is counted in the hundreds. Because that's how many fans you have, that's how much engagement you have on social media, that's how many times you've been listened to, that's how many times you've been played. And that will affect the way that random people help you. If your fame is high, there is a high chance that any random person you meet on the street in a neighborhood where your fame is high will go out of their way to help you because, oh my God, you're that person who sang that thing that I really like. But if it's really low, people will go out of their way to shame you.
Okay.
And the way that those things obviously interact as a result is you're not the only band that has those things. So if you go up... So tier as it pertains to the faction game in Sound Clash, which is the top 100, I have it called in my game, which is probably not going to stick, is that tier is decided by every band's engagement with those two factors as decided by the GM. And that also means that the GM has to be aware of what each band's relationship with both their fans and the industry also is, because it means that unlike Blades, where tier is just like this solid thing that whenever you engage with another crew, you just have to deal with the fact that their tier is high. You can actually manipulate the fact that you may be going up against a band that is very highly regarded by the industry, but has a terrible relationship with fans. So if you go out of your way to engage with locals about the fact that you have to go up against this band in a clash, or the fact that they did something to hurt you, then random folks on the street will just go out of their way to be your street team. And suddenly your fame went up. Or you actually go to the event and you perform, and you realize that you're just naturally doing better as a result of the fact that this audience has a marginally better relationship with you than they have with them.
Interesting.
And those are things that you get to be aware of in the process of the game.
So in a way, fame can override reputation or vice versa in certain circumstances within the game, basically,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I mean, you have to negotiate those things as well, because it's similarly perfectly possible to for instance, go up in a clash with a band that technically is worse than you in terms of fame, but because of their relationship with the industry, they were lucky enough to get like So really good sound setup that just knocks you out of the water when the actual clash starts. And you have to deal with the fact that that's just the case. Now you have to make sure that you perform the best that you possibly can. And yeah, those kinds of interactions are the things that I'm looking forward to in terms of the game. I have no idea how they work yet, which is why we're playtesting it. But
We'll all learn
that's
together.
what I have in mind.
That's very cool. We will all learn together. So okay. Well, this has been super super awesome. And while Brandon finishes up with that, I'm going to say that again for those of you who are curious and are like, "Wow, this sounds amazing. Where do I see more?" Well, on Sunday you will have the chance to see the premiere of Sound Clash: # the Clampdown. Which is going to be at 8 p.m. on Sunday with 4 amazing players whom we were first introduced to this evening and which are going to be listed here. Yeah, Sunday, which are going to be introduced to here. And that is going to be on my channel. And I and again, I do want to encourage people to spread the word about this. Obviously, it's wonderful for the channel to have more people watching, and that helps all of the games and campaigns and things that get done here. But also because, as we just talked about, I think it's significant and important to have games of this sort that are being produced because it's just a really cool premise, and especially with a premise that's also cycling around music and around the sort of way that we deploy and understand genres of music and all that is super cool. I really really dig it, and that right there is perfect. Thank you very much, Brandon. Yeah, so right there, Rock God is the thing that I would love if we could attach to the command ! Clash Crew. I think is what we're looking at, Clash Crew, because again, that just sort of fits, I think, with the sort of way the commands are named for the other rest of the campaign. So that would be perfect. Thank you, Shadowed. Yeah, Shadowed's okay also because although Shadowed is more of the the metal of all kinds. Shadowed, you missed it. One of the people is Canadian. So I want you to know, Shadowed, that Canada is represented. Canada has not been left out. So we do have a Canada rep in there. So I wanted you to know that
Yes.
Canada does exist.
Katie is here to represent Canada. You have been blessed.
Oh my gosh. Brandon, I always have and there it is. Rock God there. Wapow. Rock God dropping the command. Who has been ready? Look at that.
I like it.
Clash Crew. That is perfect. Thank you, dude. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. We'll also end up when the actual game, we start playing the game on Sunday, at some point we'll also try to see if we can put up a command that basically explains, this is the new TTRPG designed by Brandon O'Brien with, information, play testing, and development. If you want to know more, look at this or whatever. We will probably put up a command like that also because we like to have one command for the game and one command for the crew. So we will try to put that up as time goes on. But this has been amazing, Brandon. I could talk to you forever, but we should not do that because you need to go do things and get rest and do all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to go after we're done with this, play a little bit of Kingdoms of Amalur before I wrap up for the evening. But this was amazing, and I want to thank you for doing this. Where will I shouldn't ask where will the lovely folks see you next. They'll see you on Sunday. But beyond just the channel here, what else do you want to point people to in terms of stuff that you were involved with on or offline that you want people to be aware of about your stuff?
So I definitely, if we're talking about game stuff, I should mention my itch.io page.
I already got it.
You've
Yeah.
already done for me. Yes.
That was
Because I
already
was
there,
definitely going to shout out this in particular. For the case of the Ascended Seal, I made a new crew type called Fugitives, and I made a draft sheet, the version 0.5 of the crew sheet that is available for you to peruse right now on my itch page. But there are lots of other things there as well. Just a random selection of a game that would potentially interest some of you players is The Moon Wants Me to Leave You, which is a short dramatic horror game about going on a date and attempting to break terrible news to someone that may just shatter their understanding of reality. I have that and many more on my itch page that would be really lovely if you got an opportunity to look at those things and play those things. As previously mentioned, the Boca Slit Fest the premier Literature Festival of Trinidad and Tobago is having its digital festival in September. More information I will put on my Twitter because I can't remember the dates very immediately. But it would be really cool to see um, some of you pass through and support uh, Caribbean literary excellence in that space, and let folks know that work is being consumed and that you want to see and hear more. Um, and yeah, I think that's most of what I have to say. You can find me on almost everywhere on the internet at the Rising Tides. Um, that's TITHES, the same as my handle in chat. And I'm looking forward to Sunday.
Sunday's going to be.
I'm very anxious about it.
Oh,
I'm half excited and half afraid.
that's exactly what you want before a big gig, though. Like, I mean, that's how it is, right? You want
This is true.
a big concert. Yeah, I am super excited for it. It's going to be great. Brandon, thank you very, very much again for doing this. Thank you for standing in and being the guest star, and a really fascinating conversation that went in a lot of different places. And yeah, I couldn't be more excited to be able to host it. I can't wait to see how it all plays out, and we will see you on Sunday. So chat, can we get some love for Brandon in chat? And good work out of chat, by the way. Thank you for the wonderful questions too, and all the feedback there also. But Brandon, thank you, and I will see you Sunday.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Bye for now. Okay. Good stuff. So there it is. There is the Clash crew. Thank you so much for all of that. And again, you will see more of this Sound Clash thing. Sound Clash, the overlay specifically is what I'm talking about that Shadowed Mage did, coming up soon. Again, I'm really, really happy that this is coming together this way. And thank you, Incredible Inedible. Yeah, I was glad to get a chance to do it. And normally, as I say, Masters of the Dungeon is done as kind of a round table where we're all talking about a couple of given topics. But this one, I wanted to focus a little bit more on just specifically talking to Brandon about the stuff that he's been working on in that space and the sort of qualities of that, because I just am really excited for this. And again, it's interesting that Brandon mentioned this, because the idea was not, well, let me look. All right, I need to make sure that I get more games by marginalized creators. I mean, I am actively looking to have more, players of various marginalized backgrounds, because, representation is important. But the idea is not checking off bingo cards, right? Brandon pitched it to me as, this is here's this game about, punk rockers fighting the man, essentially fighting oppression while they rise up the ranks as bands, and doing so with, musical magical powers. And I'm like, I'm in, where do I sign? Like, again, like nothing in any of the descriptions that Brandon has made of this game, there's never been a moment where I'm kind of like, well, I don't really know if that's going to work. And I don't like, it's just all awesome. Like, why would I not want to do that? So I'm just really super pumped that we're able to host it here. And I hope that it will be a measure of something that will allow other channels to think about, continuing to do other games as well. Dot does this, obviously, and has been featuring other kinds of games also. Same thing with people like Eric Vulgaris. Grant R. Ellis has been doing this also. Unmade Gaming. There are other folks in this space, obviously, who have been doing other sort of independent game design stuff too. But again, I do love D&D. I grew up with it. That's the thing. I come back to D&D on multiple occasions, but I also really love the experience of having the exposure and connection to other games that teach me so much about what the tabletop space can do, what dynamic storytelling can be, how to tell different kinds of stories and under what circumstances you can do that, and how to broaden it. And again, this thing that I was talking about generosity of spirit. And I think the more that we have these systems out there, the better. It's the same principle in reading. I am a fantasy and science fiction writer, right? That's the thing that I tend to write more than other things, although I have some crossovers here and there, and obviously I write academic stuff. But I read widely. I read within fantasy and science fiction, and I also read outside of it. I read nonfiction. I read so-called literary fiction. I read thrillers. I read mysteries. I read other stuff because you need to do that. right? Because it makes me a much better writer and also, I hope, teacher of all kinds of literature and gives me more insight as well. So almost always my answer to how do I do more of whatever it is, read more things, write more things, and that doesn't mean that you must never have a favorite, because you do have favorites. But reading widely, I think, has so much value in so many different ways, that anyway, that's what this reminds me of. So play and learn about games widely also. Doesn't mean that you then have to not, have favorites, because everyone does, and I do too. But having those other games that you can look at and learn from and gain from and really enjoy the experience of watching being played. Sorry, microphone. Watching being played, even if you don't play it yourself, that's awesome. So it really does make a difference to be able to take that in widely. So thank you, everybody. That was an awesome episode 28. Now we are going to do something else, and we are going to play some Kingdoms of Amalur. So what I'm going to do is, hey, what's up, Coming Guy? I think it went really well. I mean, people can tell you what they thought in chat, but I enjoyed it immensely. So thank you. It was great. Oh no, Foxy. Foxy, though, listen, pickup games are a thing, Foxy, on the internet. You can do that, right? I mean, pickup games are a thing. There are people on my very Discord server that are often looking and talking about playing different things, wanting to play Esper Genesis games and other stuff like that. So don't give up on that. I mean, even if you don't have something in your local area, you can definitely do that even on the internet. So, it's there, it exists, it's possible. So I just wanted to mention that thing. Exactly. Yes, exactly, Rudinell. But no, it's like, sorry, that aside, I hope that it was valuable. But either way, Foxy, I think you can use that for these things as well. So, and I do community D&D also. Yeah, there you go. No, it really makes a difference. CandyCon wants to. There you go. See, so actually, Incredible and Inedible. Can you throw a link in chat for that for people to take a look at? That would be lovely if you wouldn't mind. But I do also do D&D with viewers, which I will be doing a weekend from now. But anyway, but I want to make sure that I get on to Kings of Amalur. So thank you again to Brendan O'Brien, Rising Tides. Again, great pleasure. Really enjoy the conversation on so many levels. And I can't wait for Sunday. It's going to be awesome sauce. And for those of you who are watching Masters of the Dungeon, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to restart it. And I'm going to restart the recording. I'll still be streaming, so that's not going to stop it. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'll restart it, and we'll move into some Kingdoms of Amalur. So here we go. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you to those who watch Masters of the Dungeon. We'll see you next month for more on that show.